Hello, Helena. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Joe. So nice to talk to you.
Now I have to fully disclose, Helena and I are kids' sports sideline pals, and I've been harassing her for months on end to come on the podcast, and then I kept cancelling her booking in the calendar. So we're
It's
finally
okay.
here.
We're busy ladies.
Very busy. Now, please tell me, who are you? Where are you from? And where are you based now?
So my name is Helena Gilmour. I am originally Swedish, and I left Sweden when I was 7. And I've lived in about 9 different countries throughout childhood and adulthood. And now I'm based in Singapore, and I've been here for 7 years, which is the longest that I've ever lived in one house or one apartment in my whole life.
That's crazy. I didn't know that. Go. I feel like I'm going to find out lots of things about you.
Maybe.
That's
So
the
many
point of
secrets.
this. Okay, so talk us through what was bouncing you around in childhood?
Yeah, so my dad, or my stepdad, worked in airline catering. So we moved around to where they were opening up new airports. So I lived in Istanbul for a few years. I lived in Warsaw. And then I lived in Hong Kong when they were building the new airport, which I still call the new airport, which is now like probably 25 years old or something like that. So basically, I grew up as an expat, as a third culture kid. All my friends' dads were mainly dads because it wasn't really the mums at the time, which is changing. All my friends' dads were, diplomats or like had all these cool jobs. We were airline catering. But we had lots of Haagen-Dazs ice creams in our freezers, which was a nice little bonus.
So cool.
Yeah, so I've been an expat kid, and then I became an overseas student when I went to university. I decided to go and study in the UK and started working in London. And then I joined a big, one of the big 4 professional services firms. I joined PwC mainly because I wanted to have that kind of career where I could move around, to continue that way of life, because that's what was normal for me. We kind of lived somewhere for 2-3 years, and then we would move to a different place, and I wanted to do that. So my first overseas posting was to Tokyo when I was about 24. I moved to Japan by myself, and had a very interesting experience. I was young. I was a brand new manager and female, and obviously not Japanese, which are like the 3 worst things to be in Japan from a professional point of view. It was a tough, challenging experience. I absolutely love Japan, but I would not go back and work in Japan again.
Interesting. How long were you there
Yeah.
for?
So I was there just under a year. So it was like a secondment posting. I actually had asked to go to, because PwC, you can kind of say, if you want to go on secondment. So I had said, I really want to go to like Sydney or Singapore or maybe like San Francisco, somewhere like that. And they're like, how about Japan? I'm like, all right, sure. So having I'd lived in Hong Kong. I'd also lived in Bangkok for a while. I was like, wow, it's Asia. Like I know Asia. It'll be fine. And then had a very humbling experience where I realized that, I didn't know all of Asia, and Japan was very, very different from the Asia that was my Asia.
Yeah, interesting. And so back to London from there?
And then back to London, got married, and then my husband and I moved to Hong Kong. So I asked him to get a job in New York because I wanted to go and live in New York before having kids. And he said, okay, I'll go. And so I was like, I'll just get a transfer with PwC. So you need to get a job offer. And he came back like a month later and he's like, okay, I got 2 offers. So we can go to Copenhagen or Hong Kong. I'm like, but I asked for New York. So Copenhagen was not quite so attractive to me as a Swede because it's too close to home. So it's not really different enough. So we went back to Hong Kong, which was fantastic. I mean, I loved it. I already had a group of friends. I knew the city. I knew where we wanted to live. So that was a super easy transition for me, even though it was a very different experience, being a professional in Hong Kong versus, being a 16-year-old. And then I didn't actually transfer with PwC. I was waiting for a transfer to come through, and then I got another job while I was waiting with the paperwork. So I took the other job it was more money. And ended up, so I was working in PwC, so I wasn't a trailing spouse at the time. And I loved being we were, what were we, like 30, 28, 30, something like that. No kids, two good incomes. We had a
Living
blast in
best
Hong
life.
Kong.
I bet you did.
And we had all this free
All
time.
that money you saved as well, I can imagine.
No, we didn't, because
I was joking.
we didn't because my husband was like, I think I want to do an MBA. I'm like, okay, I'm supportive of that. And he because he was considering INSEAD before we moved to Hong Kong, but then we chose the job in Hong Kong. So he said, oh God, maybe do one of these part-time MBAs, because they'll be good. He was working for a US firm, so that stuff's important. So he got accepted into this part-time MBA over 2 years, and I was like, well, maybe I should do that too, because very much of the opinion that anything you can do, I can do better. So I decided also to do an MBA. So we were classmates for 2 years, sitting, we'd work all day, and then this was like an evening thing, 6 till whatever it was, 9 or something like that. Like, we just didn't watch TV, and we didn't save any money because we spent it all on education. It was good. It was really fun. Yeah.
Wow. There you go. So you both graduated at the same time. Did you have your little hats on at the same time?
No, I missed my graduation ceremony because I gave birth like 3 days before. I never went, but never mind.
Okay. So Nina was born in Hong Kong then?
She was born in Hong Kong, and then when she was 6 months old, we moved back to London. We would have stayed in Hong Kong longer, but the job said, please move back to London. So back to London we went. And I was working for a Japanese bank in London, and then got time for the second baby. We're like, well, we can't live in central London, so where should we go? And we basically looked at a map and said, well, let's weigh it all up. And we said, we'd like to go to Singapore if we can. So we went to Singapore. Luckily, my husband found a job, and I was like, let's go. And we've been here 7 years now. So I came to Singapore I was actually on maternity leave from my second baby for the first, 9 months in Singapore. And, so was then a trailing spouse for a bit, then found a job here. But after 2-3 years there, it was a really small firm compared to the big firms that I was used to working for. Probably wasn't quite the right fit for me. So I left, and now I run my own business.
Mm-hmm. Goodness me. Okay.
So I've kind of done all of it. Like, I've been the expat kid, I've been an overseas student, I've been a young professional, I've been a more senior expat and a trailing spouse, and now an entrepreneur in a foreign country.
Tick.
Exactly. What else is something new to tick off?
Yeah. So plus I smashed out an MBA while I was pregnant, just also saying.
Well, I was only pregnant for the last bit. It was a 2-year program, so. Yeah.
Hilarious. So these are the overachieving women that I've got to sit next to watching kids sport.
No, so I think it's just a mindset thing, because the way that I grew up, like, nothing was not possible. I know it's not double negative, but like, everything, if you consider something, I mean, why not? It might not work out, but you certainly try for it if it's something you want to do.
And this really interesting mindset that you as like a third culture kid. Actually, do you want to, in layman's terms, sort of describe to people listening to this who haven't sort of come across the concept of a third culture kid?
Yeah, so third culture kid, or a TCK, is basically somebody who is from one culture. So in my case, Sweden, living in any other country. So I lived in Turkey, I lived in Poland. So I'm not in my home country, but I'm also not fully integrated into the country where I'm living. And so basically you form this little international bubble of kids who are creating a third culture.
Mm.
And though the similarities between those kids in all the countries in the world is like, it's huge. I can spot another third culture kid from across the room. And I know that even if we can't find mutual friends straight away, we can find mutual connection points within like the first 45 seconds of that conversation.
You can pick it in an adult?
Yeah, often.
Fascinating. That's so
Yeah.
interesting. So I think that's the difference that like expats in that sort of more traditional sense who have like only done the moving around as adults and with careers and whatever, like haven't grown up like you have doing it. I think that what seems to be often the challenge or the, the, the they find it problematic, like witnessing it, well, me experiencing it myself, but watching other people that are long-term expats that still feel that they have roots in one certain place and that they are doing their kids somehow a disservice by not having large amounts of time in that place. But when you've bounced around, like you guys can genuinely embrace because there's not that sort of pining for home as such.
There's not the pining for the particular place in the same
Yeah.
way, but there is still the guilt of keeping kids away from grandparents. And it's ironic because, so I get it a bit from my parents. They're like, oh, you're so far away. And I'm like,
You did
you
this to
did
your
this to
parents.
me. Like, the only reason I live far away is because you set that example. But like, you know, they mean perfectly well. And of course, I get that they miss the grandkids, but I'm like, you're being a little bit hypocritical here. But yeah, we still get that. And I do feel bad because, you know, my husband didn't grow up like this. He grew up in a small town in Scotland. And, you know, his family didn't necessarily sign him up for that. But ironically, he's got two siblings, and up until recently, one was living in New Zealand and one was living in Houston, and then we were in Singapore. So his parents would just go on round the world trips to visit all their children. So, you know, they didn't have it too bad.
Yeah, that's pretty tough, isn't it? They're pretty cool places to go to as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, I think it's fascinating. I've got a few friends that I've made over the years and doubled down on here in Singapore that have grown up like you have, and I think that there's definitely I wouldn't be able to pick you like you probably can, but there is definitely comfort where I watch you guys looking a lot more comfortable in situations that you can see are uncomfortable for others, that are sort of just like that, just not being able to get over frustrations of a place that's different to where they've come from or whatever. And it's that sort of almost comparison thing with, oh, at home
Yeah.
or, you know, we do that. I guess that, where do you say, well, at home, the time that I home was Turkey, and at home, that other part of Asia that I lived in, like it's quite a different
That's the thing, right? When you've
experience.
seen something done so many different ways, and even like within countries, you know, things can be done in different ways. I know I appreciate now how big Australia is, and I know things are not necessarily the same from one coast to the other. But I think the more waves you've seen things done, then the more accepting you become of when you see something done in, you know, the 10th way. The 10th way is easier to accept rather than the second way or even the third way. And that's with like everything, you know, from like those like daily little frustrations to why can't I get this type of food to why can't I get this type of work pass? You know, you've just seen things done differently, and it just becomes okay. Well, we'll find a solution because there's always a solution. It might not be, you know, you got to think outside the box sometimes because it might not be the solution that's you thought was acceptable, but there's always some sort of solution.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Like, I don't want to ask you this next question, which can then be problematic to the smooth running of your household. But like, do you have itchy feet? 7 years,
Yes.
man.
Yeah. 7-year itch for sure. But I could have left 2 years ago if it was the right opportunity. So I don't really look at it as you know, okay, well we have like this time limit and we have to go. And it's not about necessarily wanting to go to a different place. It's more about what new thing is going to come. So
Yep.
that could be, so for me, I left my corporate job about 2 years ago. Maybe that was part of, you know, an expression of I need a little change
Yeah.
or a big change. And that could, it could come in the form of a change in role. It can come in the form of, kids was a pretty big change. I didn't really require that much change after that. Or in the form of going to a different place. But I mean, I could literally pack up today and that would be okay. But that's something that I feel continuously.
Yeah. But it would be driven by the next opportunity rather than the need for change.
At the moment, it would be driven by opportunity. And now, it's not just me. It's not just me and my husband going, okay, well, what's something new and exciting for us? Or where's the money good? And, that kind of stuff. But now it's about, you got to consider safety for kids, and you got to consider what kind of schooling, and counting back from, okay, well, at what stage might be appropriate to make a move? I moved halfway through the school year several times when I changed schools. Do you want to do that? Or is it better to wait a few months and move at the end of, a school year to make a transition different? There's a lot of things to consider with kids when you're adding that into the mix.
But that doesn't even work, because then you start bouncing around in hemispheres and you can try and do ends of school years and it just doesn't work.
Exactly. And you don't have control over that decision. That is part of the package of, you move overseas, you have all these fantastic opportunities, but there is a cost, and the cost is partly that you let go of some control. We had that continuously through my dad's career, but also through our career. We didn't want to leave Hong Kong. We moved in March. We weren't even at the end of our lease. But when the company says you got to go, you can't choose to stay because you don't have the right to live in that country without a valid pass.
Yes, and that's such a good point, actually, because you can't dummy spit and say, no, but I don't want to do that, and I'm just going to stay and keep doing what I want to do.
So, within the EU, I could do that. I can't even do that in the UK anymore, which is, one of my homes. It's probably the country that I've not continuously, but probably the country that I've spent the most time in. But post-Brexit, I don't even have the right to show up there, even though my husband is British and one of my children is British. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is what I always then also find fascinating when you meet people like yourselves and then your kids. I'm always like, what passports has everyone got?
Yeah. So my daughter was born in Hong Kong. So she has a Swedish passport, because in Sweden, they've actually equalized it now, but it used to be that citizenship passes through the mother in the first instance. So she only has a Swedish passport, whereas my son was born in the UK. So he was first Swedish via me and first British, because in the UK, citizenship passes with a father. So he actually has both. Whereas my husband is also now a Swedish citizen, because we've been married that long that he's entitled to citizenship.
But you
it's just me. It's just me.
So you can't just by default get a British one, though. You guys have got to there.
Yeah, I don't think I could get one. I could have gotten one in the UK in the past, but it was never relevant because it was in the EU. So why would you do that? But now I'm the odd one out.
How funny. I quite often get from my girls, oh, Mum, we're so boring. We've just got boring Australian passports. I was like, pal, you don't understand how lucky that passport is that you've got.
Yeah.
We talk to a lot of friends, a lot of my husband's colleagues and things. And I don't know, that's going to be something that as the girls get older, they'll start to realise the privilege that comes with just where you happen to have been born and that passport.
For sure. But I hear what they're saying, because when I was growing up, I was always like, oh, I can't believe you're both from the same country and I just have one passport. Why couldn't one of you be from somewhere else? And then I would also have this free extra language. And so I always thought when I got married, I would marry somebody who was a French speaker or, a Spanish speaker, another language, so that my kids would get two native tongues. And then I married an English speaker. So.
Well, can you call a Scot an English speaker? I love you, Scotland. I say that with love. Having lived in northeast Scotland, I beg to differ whether we all speak the same English, because
that's true. That's true.
Australian speaking to northeast Scots, I swear there is not a common
No.
sort of huge amount of common language in between.
No. So, my husband's fine. Like he speaks pretty easy English, but my in-laws and like going back one generation further, I just nod and smile when I'm there. I don't understand a thing.
Oh, I can remember
It's okay.
our boiler broke one time when we were living in Scotland, and the guy that came to fix the boiler came in and was speaking in English apparently, and we sat there sort of staring at him until he sort of stared that there was obviously a response required, and we'd say yes, and he'd give us a look like, I think the answer was supposed to be no, and we'd say no, and he'd be like, okay. And that's how the conversation went. And then we were like, I guess the boiler's fixed.
Yeah. No, it's a strong dialect, put it that way.
But I love that sometimes, that just like we've lived in a fair few places and done a lot of traveling. But I when I was at university, I went on exchange to the University of Kentucky and had the best time. It was amazing. But I took my husband there. Oh God, when was it? We'd been living in Canada and were finishing up, and we had a big sort of road trip through the US. And so we swung in and saw some friends of mine in Kentucky. And Hugh, to this day, still says, I've been to a lot of places around the world and I've never had culture shock like Kentucky. Just so different. So different. So it's it's very funny, even though you can speak the same language, the culture thing can be very different.
Oh, for sure. And like, you take it the US, like that's a big country.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
So if you could plot a circumstance change, is there somewhere that you would love to live and spend some time?
So, I mean, I wouldn't want to move to New York now with 2 small children. I will live in New York at some stage in my life. Maybe I'll be like fabulous and when I'm 70 or whatever, and just go to concerts in New York. I haven't lived in Switzerland. I know people think Switzerland's maybe a bit boring, but it's a bit cooler than Singapore. So maybe Switzerland. Yeah, I'm pretty easy. I'm pretty laid back. We'll go. I would never go and live in a war zone, but apart from that, I'm open.
Pretty cool. I know it's pretty chill, isn't it? And I sometimes think that like that can almost be a bit overwhelming. Like we've talked previously about that whole concept of like, okay, cool, we can literally go anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Let's just go and find jobs and go there. And then you're like, oh gosh, there's actually so many options and the world's really, really big.
Yeah. So if I think like we're strategically we're like sort of limited by big finance centers from a career perspective. So the list is shorter. But any of those, I've only ever lived in like pretty big cities. I don't know how I would handle like a more rural setting.
What? The thriving metropolis of Wagga in rural New South Wales, Australia is not on that list?
I'm not sure how that would work for me. I mean, like, I've only recently got my very first car, so I've only ever lived in the middle of a city. I never needed a car before.
That's hilarious. Well, I can vouch for the sideline of soccer watching banter. It's the same in Wagga as it is in Singapore, just saying.
So I fit right in.
Yeah, you'll be fine.
I'm pretty adaptable, so it should be fine.
That's an interesting concept. I sort of forget about that with people that have grown up in cities, that just bouncing back to you driving. Where did you learn to drive?
Okay, so Swedish people often go back to Sweden in the summers. It's like not all countries do this, or like not all expats from all countries do this, but Swedish people definitely do it. I think the French kind of tend to go back during August. It's sort of a sacred thing. So every summer we went back to Sweden for at least 5-6 weeks. So I did like different summer camps and that kind of thing. But when I had turned 18, or I was 18 or 19, as part of my trip home for the summer, I learned to drive. So I had like a normal driver's license. I just then didn't ever drive a car up until September. I'm pretty good now.
Well, that's good. Goodness me. I've just been in Australia for 2 weeks and was like, oh, that's right. I spend all my time in a car. Like everything is so far away from each other.
Mm,
I like had to
yeah.
drive. I was staying down with my sister, and I had to drive up for a doctor's appointment to get have a mole check with my doctor, and it's like a 2-hour drive each way. So I drove up, did the appointment, and then had some lunch and drove back, and didn't think anything of it, and no one thought anything of it. And I said that to a friend in Singapore, and she was like, "Are you mad?"
That is hilarious. So I had a mole check done last week because I was like, oh, I really need to get it done. I used to see a doctor that was like at Gleneagles, which is a little bit further from my house. And I moved it to another doctor that was a bit more convenient. So it was only like 3 minutes on the bike as opposed to like having to take the train 2 stops.
I know, it's bonkers. I know. I've been seeing some other
I'm
doctors.
all about the convenience.
Oh, I know. I saw 2 doctors the other week in Singapore, and I walked to both of my appointments.
Exactly.
I know. And then I tell my Australian friends that, and they're like, "Are you serious?"
Yeah.
And you got an appointment in the same week? Like, that is then when I get reminded when you go back, especially to rural Oz,
Yeah.
that you're like, you want to see a doctor, man? You're like 6 months
Yeah.
talking in advance. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I know.
Mhm.
Well, because my normal line of questioning goes along the lines of, is there something you wish you knew before you'd started? But like, you were born into this. You were born this way.
Yeah. But I still think there's a big change when you've got kids that I really did not consider. So I have done a lot of moves, but I did a move when we moved to Singapore. My son was 8 weeks old. I had just had a C-section, and I was like, okay, well, we'll go. It was just before Christmas. We came for 2 weeks to try to find an apartment. I also had a 2-year-old with me. And I tried to find an apartment, tried to find a school, then went back to Sweden and Scotland for Christmas, and then came out to Singapore again for New Year's Eve. So with hindsight, like those are some of the decisions I might not have made, because I think I just assumed it was going to be easy. I've done this so many times. It's going to be fine. I know how to move. And like the packing stuff and like that stuff's all fine. And the mental work was all fine. But I had not, added these 2 additional people into the picture. So I think we're always learning, life changes. And I'm sure, some of those more emotional things when your kids get older or when you have to take other people into account. Yeah. You make mistakes and you learn.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. They definitely do add another element to it. It's funny, I wasn't so much with the moving because I hadn't moved with kids before. Our move from Australia to Singapore was the first time that I've relocated with kids, and they were bigger. They were 6 and 8, and they were pretty good. It was just more actually emotions that I wasn't really prepared for, because I was like, "You'll be right. Come on, this is fun." And they were a bit like, "I have feelings, Mum."
Yeah.
Oh, but something that I was out of practice with, like it's a post-COVID thing. One of the first trips that we did when we got to Singapore was we went to South Korea for Christmas. And I just sort of forgot how you travel with kids, and I sort of just didn't plan anything and just turned up and was like, "Oh yeah, it'll be right." And then was like, "Okay, it wasn't right. It was actually really hard." And we spent like 6 hours at a train station in minus 20 degrees with my 2 kids at 10 o'clock at night. Doing things like that I was like, "Oh, whoops, I've forgotten how to do this."
Yeah. No, COVID was a real hiccup.
Yeah.
No.
Yes. Okay, my last question for you. What do you see people constantly just ballsing up, like making a mess of, when you're witnessing other people do expat life? Because you're like a pro and you can sit there and judge all you like.
No. So I would say no. You know what? Everybody has a different experience, and everybody has, you never know what goes on behind closed doors, and everybody's coming from a completely different place. I think what I maybe think is unfortunate when I see people who are coming for like their 2-year, and they're only going to do a 2-year stint, and then they spend all their time with a community that speaks the same language, comes from the same place, that I think is a little bit of a waste, because there's always more to see. And it's hard. You can never, the reason it's called third culture kids is because you cannot fully integrate to a new culture, as an expat for 2 years. You're not going to fully integrate. You can try to integrate as much as possible. And I think it's sad when you see people who just are, they don't leave their little cluster of what feels comfortable to them.
Mm-hmm.
Or if they do leave it, they only leave it with a group of people who are exactly like them.
Because what's the point, really?
Yeah. What's the point? Okay, the weather's nice, and it's a change of scenery, but it's more than scenery. It's, getting in and going exploring by yourself is the best thing you can possibly do. I mean, if you have to, bring one friend, but just walking around a city without a map, getting lost and finding your feet and the smells and the sights and eating something you've never eaten before, being actually adventurous. And it doesn't matter what age you are, young people do it better. But I think for the older people who are, coming in at maybe a more senior career posting, and then being the trailing spouse coming along with that at the age of 45, 50, whatever, it's harder to do that kind of stuff. But you have to force yourself out of your comfort zone to get the most out of the experience.
100%.
And the other thing I kind of see with when people, sorry to interrupt you, Joe, who say, okay, well, I can't work here, and so I won't do anything. There's always something you can do, even if it's not working in the career path that you had seen for yourself. You can study, you can learn something new, you can volunteer. There are always things that you can find that will have some sort of, it might not be the straight line thing, but that fit into your skill set, or they're always going to be beneficial for you in the future. It's never a waste of time to learn something new, or to go and volunteer, or to get involved in whatever it is. Find something to do.
Just can't smash out an MBA.
No, but so when
I'm not joking, I'm sort of joking, but it crossed my mind when we came here. I was sort of I could just not do that and not try and work and not try and do stuff and go and study or retrain as something else. Or
but it doesn't even have to be so big, right? An MBA is big, or doing a degree is really big. I have a friend who lives here in Singapore, and so Sweden, if you're Swedish, you can study for free at any Swedish university. We don't have tuition. And now post-COVID, you can do almost anything online. And so she just does courses in things that she's interested in. She does art history here, or introduction to graphic design, and anything. You can do so many different things. And it's all about going out and making those things happen.
I love that. But I think that's the same, that so many people say, you never listen to people that are oh God, I wish I'd done less stuff while I was I really wish I'd moped around more while I was being an expat.
Right. And I get that when people see okay, I've had a long career, and I'm going away for 2 years, so I'm going to take a break. Sure. Take a break. But if you don't do anything, if you've been working for 25 years and you don't do anything for 2 years, you are going to be miserable. So find something to do.
I love that. I think that is fabulous advice to end on. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. This was so fun. Thanks for having me, Jo.
Fun. I didn't realize that you lived in so many countries. See?
Yeah.
I need to interview everyone I meet to then find out a literal chronological list of where they've lived across their lifespan.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks so much, Helena. I'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.